Okay, so two guys with not a lot to talk about. First of all, I want to thank both Mark and Carl. Appreciate you guys coming here and spending a lot of time with us and talking about your take on the marketplace. I do have a couple of questions, and I certainly want to open it up to other audience members. I like the Cow Buddies thing. I thought that was really good. One New Yorker to another. Yes. It's like, you know, but you're up upstate in Rockland County, so that's a whole different environment. Okay. So, Mark, on the cover slide of your presentation, you had a great line. Free is not a viable business model. Mm-hmm. I'd like to revisit that in the context of how we open this. And I want to think about it and going back to a comment that was in the opening session this morning, where an audience member representing a municipality posed a question that I think is on the lips of almost any municipality and any municipal official in America today thinking about Wi-Fi or Metro Wireless. And that is, how can I do this without expending public monies? Because that's what the political climate is. We all know this. We're all taxpayers, right? Mm-hmm. So when you talk about free, okay, how do you define free? Do you mean that there's no public money, there's no public support at all, whether it's access to mounting assets, it's anchor tenancy commitments, okay, or is free just not, well, we don't want to pay for the build out?
So I think as you take a look at both presentations, the focus of free means somebody else comes in and just does the work for you without you being involved in the equation. As you look at the deployments that have taken place where the city is not going to use the network for themselves, the city is going to just strictly use the network as a new access to broadband, applying it out for strictly social inclusion.
Constituent service.
Constituent service. I think that the market is proving out that, and I think Carl really spelled out a lot of the cost structures on the other side, that balance, if you will, of what it costs to build out the network versus the fees that you receive on the subscription side doesn't balance out.
Right.
So I think that the models that are working is where people utilize the network to change the way that they're doing business. Right. And very specifically, what we're seeing as success is where municipalities are using it for services themselves and paying for those services.
Right.
So there is funding.
Are they paying for them? I'm sorry to interrupt. Are they paying for them in hard dollars? Are they paying for them in terms of access to mounting assets? Do you have come down on one side or the other?
Yeah, I think whether you're paying for the services that they receive.
Okay.
Not strictly with passing back assets. Mm-hmm. I think that may work in the most dense areas.
Right.
And again, I think that I like the way that Carl laid that out. The density makes a difference. The tighter the impact, the easier it is to roll out, and you can provide it for a lower cost per person.
Okay. Carl, same thing. When somebody says, we don't want to, we want a free network.
Right.
Okay. Once you stop laughing, from that, how, do you ask the question like, define free? What does that mean?
Well, I think you have to understand what people are looking for, right? From AT&T's perspective, you have one. You have cellular, you have DSL, you have POTS, you have 3 networks available today. That's not counting what our competitor has in place. But when people ask me for free, and there's a couple interesting RFPs that are out there now, usually I just spend the time trying to understand what they're looking for, okay? Usually it comes back to digital inclusion, social inclusion. And then really, that's a different story. How do we go solve that problem, right? And that problem for AT&T, who's a member of your community, remember, 300,000 employees, chances are good you live in the same neighborhood as somebody. And we try and find a way to meet those needs collectively.
So when you have negotiations with municipalities, okay, and
yeah.
all these wonderful contract discussions that you've alluded to earlier, do they actually start to ask you questions about what your profit margins are going to be and how much, like you said, free cash flow you're going to throw off for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, they do.
Mm-hmm. And do they try to manage that for you? Do they try to limit the amount of profit that you're generating on the back of either their government operations or their residents?
Not really. Not really. Mostly because we don't share. So it's just a different perspective for us, right? We're not an open book financial play for each individual deal.
Right.
And so I know that the USI Minneapolis deal is a little bit different. They dug in together, they sat down. Carl helped them determine, how much money he thinks they should make. That's not necessarily our perspective. So really, if you start with the first question, which is, hey, how much are you going to make? And you say, well, something, then the next question doesn't come.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Other questions from the audience here? Yes, right here. I'm sorry.
I wanted to segue off your question. Considering AT&T probably doesn't have that much of a presence in the Northeast as far as the network goes, you have to compare with towns or cities of similar cost structure, say in the Southwest or the West Coast. Is it going to be a little more expensive for AT&T to come in and set up a new network here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer to that question is no. And it has a lot to do with how you handle the egress, right? But remember, AT&T has network presence everywhere, okay? And so we've got egress points throughout the city of Boston. And so for us, there's that opportunity. Remember, too, also, we have our cellular assets that are in the city of Boston, which provide us additional egress points, right? So really, for whether you are the incumbent local service provider or not, from our perspective, we have network in all cities, right? And so, and really where you come to tap the wired network is for egress, okay?
Yes, over here.
Yeah, I get the call. I typically look through the RFP. I go to Wikipedia. I run the demographics. I call my accountant, who runs the numbers, right? And then I can tell it's either black or red.
And what are the factors that determine, that they're black or red for you?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple flags for me typically in an RFP, right? There's a plethora of these new county-wide ones, which tend to be problematic right out of the gate, just because of a density point of view, right? So when you start thinking about doing, 95% coverage over 450 square miles, that tends to be a problem, okay? Because the density just never gets there to let you decide to do it. Frankly, if you were going to do a county, Wi-Fi probably wouldn't be your best technology. We would leverage our WiMAX assets, our WiMAX spectrum, and go do that. But typically, I'll look right at density. That's usually the first kick out, right? And I'll have that conversation with the city, right? For me, I'm much more direct, maybe more so than I should have been. But that's typically the first one. The second thing that we'll work through, assuming that the density looks like it could work, then we'll just start to walk through and say, hey, help me understand what you're expecting. Help me understand what you're looking for. And if you're looking for 1 meg free, unlimited, with digital inclusion programs that include a $2 million upfront payment, a 10% revenue share, right? Those things tend to be problems because I can't, I got to make some money. Well, I know, believe it or not. So, does that answer your question?
Just one follow-up.
Yeah, please.
That means after you do that analysis, if you don't see a way of responding to the RFP with your way of providing the
Yeah.
answer, you wouldn't bother.
I wouldn't bother. We typically would decline.
So how about if there were specific applications that they were looking to drive from a county standpoint, where they would actually have an integrated portion of the network?
Right.